Another person with three names.
Like William Jennings Bryan.
Well, I wasn't making that parallel, but yes, okay. John Perry. Go ahead.
Well, in addition to the currently fashionable flu, I am still trying to recover from William Jennings Bryan. Or actually the fantastic spectacle of watching somebody saddle up my old metaphor and really ride it into the sunset. I thank you for that, Kurt. I have never seen a dead horse go so far as the frontier went. Now, I want to actually, as many of you know, I have one of my personal missions is to destroy broadcast media. And so I have no interest in being a broadcast medium, and in spite of the fact that we don't have mics in the audience, I know, since this is a gathering of the anointed, that we have ego sufficient to power our voices so that we can talk back and forth. People will stand up and say something. I want to have a discussion about what is still pleased to call itself intellectual property. Because, and I know that many of you think that you know what I think about this, or what Esther Dyson thinks about this. I had the rough experience recently. I was giving a speech on copyright at the University of California at Berkeley Law School, and Denise Caruso sailed in, scowling and dark, and pointed a finger at my chest and says, "Just say something new, Barlow." There have been many attempts to emasculate me, but I'd say that was probably the most successful. But it was also salutary, and since I know that Denise is here, I will still try to say something new, and also hope to get something new back from you. But first of all, for the benefit of those who think they know what I think about copyright and probably don't, and also those of you who never even heard of me or my views on copyright, I'm going to briefly restate a few things. I am of the opinion that when you have a medium that makes it possible for anything that human beings can do with their minds to be reproduced infinitely and distributed infinitely at zero cost, that it changes the game of publication so profoundly that any of the rules that we have established since Gutenberg for regulating that are essentially void. Now, I don't think that copyright no longer applies to copies. I'm a firm believer in the notion that if somebody makes a material object that contains ideas, that the economy that ought to regulate the sale and distribution of that material object should go on being protected under copyright law. And, even though there's the famous example of the Grateful Dead's willingness to let all the Deadheads supposedly rip off our intellectual property at concerts by taping them, we took a very different view of factories in Singapore pressing Grateful Dead CDs and passing them off as the real thing without paying any royalties on them. And I think that one should continue to take that view. But, as many of you know, and as some of you and your organizations are supporting, there is an initiative underway in this administration, led primarily by Bruce Lehman, which we have so far beaten back both in Washington and in Geneva, which would make a licensable copy of every bit of copyrighted material that was ever written in however transitory a state into computer memory, which means that, and would also hold the operators of distribution systems, as though they were broadcasters, responsible for paying the licensing on those copies. And they very nearly passed a bill in Congress which would have, had it been enforceable, would have killed the internet. And they very nearly got a treaty passed in Davos, I mean in Geneva, easy slip to make, that would have accomplished the same thing on an international basis. And I thank Denise in part for having come up with an editorial in the International Herald Tribune that I think was somewhat influential in stopping them from doing that. They also tried to pass a treaty in Geneva that would have declared facts about the world to be copyrightable material, so that the National Baseball Association would now own a batter's average because they had simply compiled it. Now, we can talk about the folly of that. I am convinced that we have entered into a new era which has a fundamentally different set of economic principles that we need to be taking into account and we need to start thinking about. I am also convinced that there was some wisdom in the fact that it was 200 years between Gutenberg and the Statute of Anne, which was the first copyright-like law passed in the world. And I don't know that we want to wait 200 years. Maybe we want to use that factor of 10 compression system that Kurt was talking about and wait 20 years. But I know that we're not ready to figure out how the economics of cyberspace work, but we've got a bunch of problems that do need to be solved now. And, you know, first of all, we have a problem that is based on the fact that there are two value systems that are suddenly occupying the same region. I don't think that it makes any more sense to own the work that I do with my mind as property than it does to own my friendships. I mean, I look at them both as verbs, not nouns, and I look at them as relationships, and I look at them as things that are contained within an active venue. That's how I feel about it. Unfortunately, the world is set up, and has been since the Borgias invented it, on a double-entry bookkeeping system. And the double-entry bookkeeping system assumes that every unit of whatever sort has a value, and it has to have a value that responds when there's a transaction made, and the response has to be short-coupled. The idea that what goes around comes around is not congenial to any accounting department. And so suddenly we have a marketplace where there are people who are exchanging the kind of value that I think exists in my friendships on an even par with the kind of value that Time Warner thinks exists in the writing that their paid authors have produced for one of their magazines. We have to start thinking about how to coincide those two systems of value in such a fashion that, A, we do get paid for the work that we do with our minds, and I'm not troubled by that, by the way. I mean, it's been widely bandied about that, you know, the reason I feel the way that I do about this is because I'm an old hippie and I don't care about money. And besides, I've got so much money from Grateful Dead that, you know, what difference would it make? This is not true. I am greedy. I'm pleased to say I think greed is one of the great forces in the world, and much of what I do with my mind is in the service of getting my kids through college, and I mean to be paid for it. I just have recognized that there's a completely different economy that works very well in the digital domain, that does not involve my being proprietary about my work at all, but rather involves the fact that there is an inverse correlation between the usual rule of scarcity and value. In the physical world, scarcity and value are highly correlated. I mean, diamonds are not intrinsically valuable, but they happen to be valuable because the De Beers Corporation owns most of them and can parcel them out. And most of what goes on in physical exchange is about regulating towards scarcity. In the virtual world, there's a relationship between familiarity and value, and so what you want to do is create as much of a spread of your work and your identity as you possibly can. But that means that you can't own what you have done. It means that you have to get paid for what you have not yet done, which I think is fine, and that's the basis on which I get paid. And I also get paid on the basis of my attention, as many of you do. I mean, attention is the real currency. It's the one thing that Bill Gates and I have the same amount of. I've got so much time and I've got so much attention, and I can interact only so much. And I can charge people. I don't intend to charge anything for the things that I put out on the net that I've written. I don't try to establish any control over those things, but I do charge people when I come and consult in their company. And there is a relationship between those two things. I'm not going to go off on that tangent too far, but what I'm primarily concerned about is that you've got a lot of individuals like myself who have recognized that there is a new economy and are using it quite successfully in cyberspace to produce intellectual goods that they are paid for within a relationship model, which is, by the way, very much like the one that copyright lawyers use. You know, one of the sublime ironies here is that copyright lawyers do not, in fact, use copyright to protect their own income stream at all. They use the relationship with their clients, and they feel quite free to rip off one another's work very liberally, and actually could not get much done if they didn't. I don't think that we as a society will be able to get much done if we adopt a model that assumes that everything that people create is somehow owned and cannot be shared without the proper legal niceties having been attended to and the proper payment having been made through an increasingly tangled web of payment streams. That's simply not going to work. That will break. But how do we get the things that are currently offline? And there are many valuable pieces of human endeavor that are offline, like, for example, the Vatican Library, and now, thanks to Bill Gates, the Louvre. How do we get them online so that everybody can take benefit of them without somehow rupturing the institutional model? And the institutional model is very different from the individual model, and the institutional model is based dominantly on the assumptions, the accounting assumptions and the mercantile assumptions of the industrial period, which is you have to have an industrial process to spread out intellectual works, and you have to have a system of law that protects the results of that process and the capital requirements involved in making that process happen. And those habits of mind have been enormously influential in the knee-jerk reactions of even such modern corporations as Microsoft, who, interestingly enough, withdrew their support for the Electronic Frontier Foundation as soon as Esther and I started popping off about copyright, in spite of the fact that they are gradually moving to a model that is not based on unit sales of Microsoft software, but something more like a service relationship, which reflects the realities of the market. I mean, for example, let me ask you folks, this looks like a law-abiding group. How many of you can honestly say that you have no unauthorized software on your hard disks? Oh, come on. Really? That many? Well, that's a higher count than I usually get, but, right. Some of you are here with your employers, I suppose. But my point is this, software is a very large business. I mean, regardless of what the BSA says or the Software Publishers Association says about the terrible losses that are being suffered, software is a large business. Bill Gates is worth $22 billion or something like that. And the reason for that is not obviously, because of copyright and the fact that people are adhering to it, as you see. You are not reading and paying careful attention to that stuff that is printed on the envelope that those discs come in. What you are doing, and what you're increasingly doing with Microsoft, is entering into a practical service relationship with the vendor. Because you know that you don't want to have to make, I mean, you really don't want to have to make those phone calls to support and claim that you can't find the disk with the serial number. I mean, it sounds so lame. You want to make support calls without shame. You want to be able to get the most recent version of the software that you actually use without having to go around to your friends in that really whiny mode and say, do you have 4.0? I know I should buy it, but no, eventually you buy it. And in doing so, you enter into a system that is not based on property. You enter into a system that is based on what's that? 3 minutes. Really? Is that so?
Everything's running.
Well, you know, I suppose, but I mean, I was actually hoping that at some point we could talk back and forth. Well, okay. Doesn't look like we're going to get a chance to do that. I was assuming that the same latitude that had been given the
Well,
previous...
here's my problem, ladies and gentlemen. This is all right, but let me just tell you my problem. And the problem is everything ran late for a whole series of reasons, and everything pushes up, and we have a later and later and later night. If you're willing to let it go later and later and hang in there, then we'll just let it go later and later and hang in there. So,
well, maybe.
Don't do what you think
No, I mean,
I'm asking you to do, but I'm trying to make it so it's not like midnight or 1 in the morning. But if you want to, just by a show of hands, how many people are willing to have everything sort of just move and have full speeches up to now, move everything about a half an hour? Can't short the breaks because we have to redo the whole stage for Herbie Hancock and everything.
Let me ask you this: could we have 10 minutes where they could come back at what I've just said? You know, where
All
they
right,
could...
we're going to let everything run, but it's going to be later and later. Take 10 more minutes if you could. You see the position I'm in. What?
If people want to talk to Barlow, let them stay in the break.
We're going to redo the stage. I guess, well, okay. Take 5 more minutes, and then you can stay in here during the break, and everybody can stay in around here.
Is there a break right after me?
No. There's we have one more, Todd Mackover.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, but he will be back here. Let's take 5 more minutes.
Well,
and then there will be a chance to talk to John Perry during the break in here. Trust me, please, we'll do that.
The people who own it don't want anybody in here.
Oh.
Well,
I'm up against the wall. Okay,
all right.
we're taking...
Okay, listen,
No,
folks.
just
It's been great talking to you.
Well, no, wait a minute.
Simulcast.
Yeah.
Okay. Take 10 more minutes right now, and he will be open for questions and answers in the simulcast room during the break for anybody who wants to have a session with John Perry Barlow during the break.
I'm not looking for questions. At this point, I'm not even really looking for answers because I don't think that we know enough about what we're doing here to start making them. We certainly don't know enough to start putting them in law. But I want to hear different kinds of solutions to these problems because I think that this is a group of people that should have some thoughts on this. And we are at a critical juncture, a very serious moment where we're going to have to decide how we get paid for this stuff and what's the economic model we use and what works. Denise.
Oh, wait, no. Please, give me a break. No, just give me a break. I told you I'm not prepared to take questions and answers now, and with nobody can hear it. If we want to do that, if we want to take 10 minutes of it, we'll take 10 minutes of questions and answers now. Is that what you'd like to do?
Well, never mind.
Okay. Yes, okay. Okay, then Denise, ask a question if you would repeat the question.
Yeah, and bellow it out. Like I say, I know you can. She wants to know. She's saying if something is on the web, does that automatically? She wants to know. She's saying if something is on the web, does that automatically mean that it's open to reproduction? And it's sort of Katie bar the door, out it goes, and there's nothing you can do about it.
In the world that you would like to see.
Right, in the world that I would like to see. And no. I mean, first of all, I think that the web actually has lots of ways of checking on what's on it. I mean, if you want to find out where your work is, you can always do an Alta Vista search for it. It's not that difficult to find out where it's being reproduced. That's not the issue. I'm saying that it's impractical to exercise that kind of control, because what you want in terms of the service of this economy is something that spreads what you say, but that increases the value of what you have yet to say. And also, I think that we need to recognize that there is an awful lot of what goes on the web, in the email that you're talking about, that is an exchange of value. It's an economic exchange, but it's not monetarized. I mean, we have an awful lot of people putting in a lot of keystrokes into cyberspace, and they're getting something back out for it. And they must be feeling like they're getting some kind of value, and they're obviously putting a lot of value in. It just doesn't happen to have a clean way of being monetarized. That's
John Warnock, well, I'm going to pull hands here. John Warnock.
John Warnock says, well, if somebody puts his software up on a bulletin board and makes it freely available, he needs to go after that person. And, as things are presently structured, I would agree with you that you probably do, except that, I'm sure it happens all the time. And I think that, the fact that so few hands went up saying that they had no unauthorized software indicates that that's how it's going to happen. I would submit to you that much of that is actually a great service to you. I mean, really, I would say that you are getting users who eventually buy your product, who are not willing to go out and pay a very large fee up front because of the reasons that I talked about. They want to enter into a service relationship with Adobe eventually. Well, but I mean, speaking as somebody who for some period of time had a pirated piece of your software and eventually went out and bought it, I didn't want to pay that much money for persuasion if I wasn't sure that I was going to use it. I wanted to work with it for a while. I wanted to see whether it actually worked for me. Well, there are demo copies that are demo copies. I mean, they're broken.
Okay. A short question, and please repeat the question. No, don't make a point because nobody hears it in the other room, sir. It's not fair to half the people here.
The point is, the same copyright infringement you're worried about.
Aw, come on, you can do that, sir, can't you?
Right. The question is, it seems to me that there's technology that will allow the kind of monitoring that we want to be, and will be very efficient. In fact, we're doing that right now. Many of us are doing it, selling things efficiently over the web. But I don't understand why you talk about this tangle.
Well, the question is, there are technologies that make it possible to check, so why am I worried about the tangle? I'm worried about the tangle because I don't think that it is that it inspires the kind of economy that I think naturally exists as soon as you dematerialize commerce. I mean, when
Then how are you going to reward performance? How are you going to motivate artists to?
Well, first of all, I mean, he says, how am I going to motivate artists to do art? I mean, I don't think that's ever been a problem. Frankly, most people who produce art and literature do so because they really want to be heard. And one of the things and seen, and one of the things that I think is lamentable is the fact that there are many people who cannot have their work published now or distributed because a publisher owns it. There are people who want to have their work out there and could be making something from it, but they can't because the publisher owns it, and it's not in his economic interest to re-release books that are out of print because, they're out of there's an investment that's involved there that would not be involved in cyberspace. You see, But, you know, I think people are going to get...
No, I'm gonna make enemies here and some friends. Mr. Barlow, John Perry will be in, we'll take an hour-long conversation back and forth on this in the simulcast room. We are set up to do that. And
Yep.
he will do that during the hour break or any part of that break. We're going to go on to Todd Mackover, but he'll have another hour, and you'll have another hour to talk with him, and Todd and other people if you want to have those discussions at that time. I have to move it on for everybody.